Alright, so the last part of chapter 12 is still talking about ways of collecting data, but we're going to talk about the different ways things can affect the data you collect. So there's 3 different sampling methods. One's called random, one's called systematic, and one's called stratified. And if you have your foldable, you can fill this information out on the foldable. I'm sure you can figure out where it goes because it's pretty much set up like this table. But random is you survey people at random. Like drawing out of a hat. Or, picking a card. And systematic is where you survey every certain number of people. Say you want to survey every third person. That's systematic. And then stratified is where you separate a population into smaller groups. Like every person that is wearing a red shirt, a green shirt, a blue shirt. They all go in different groups. And then you survey people at random within that group. And they give the example separating a high school into grade level. So asking 10 ninth graders randomly and asking 10 10th graders and 10 11th graders and 10 12th graders. So example 3 says choosing a sample you want to find out how many DVD students at your school rent in a month. You interview every 10th teenager at the mall. What sampling method are you using? Is this a good sample? So you're using every 10th teenager. So that's going to be systematic. Is this a good sample? Now, you really have to read the question carefully to be able to determine that. But if you look, you're asking about DVD students at your school rent in a month, but you're asking teenagers at the mall. So is that really a good sample of your school? Because a lot of kids at the mall might not go to your school. So I'm going to say this is not a good sample. Because, don't forget the because. You have to explain, you have to justify. So it's because the kids at the mall don't necessarily represent your school. Don't abbreviate like I did on any kind of test or anything. That you heard what I was saying when I wrote it down, so I know you know what I meant. But when you're writing your answer on the test, you need to make sure you write it out because they don't hear what you're thinking. And they don't need to have, I don't need to have to figure out what you're saying, and they don't need to, whoever grades it doesn't need to have to figure out what you're saying. Alright, so you revise your plan and interview all students leaving a school assembly who are wearing the school colors. Will this plan give a good sample? And I would say yes, because all of the students interviewed likely attend your school. Now, the fact that you're only interviewing students who wear school colors is not going to affect whether they rent a DVD or not. So you don't have to worry about that being biased, which is something we'll talk about in a minute. But you're just trying to make sure that the kid goes to your school. And I think if they're leaving a school assembly and they're wearing your school colors, they probably go to your school. Alright, so let's talk about bias. If somebody's biased, they're leaning more one way than another. And so a biased question is going to kind of lead the answer in a specific direction. And when you're asking questions for a sample, you do not want to have a biased question. So we're going to have to practice figuring out bias and how to change it so it's not biased anymore. And sometimes you ask a question without even knowing that it's biased. So example 4 says, a reporter wants to find out what kinds of movies are most popular with local residents. The reporter asked, "Do you prefer exciting action movies or boring documentaries? Is this question biased?" Now, at first glance, it does not seem biased because they're not asking the person they're interviewing, to like a certain movie. But it is biased because how many different kinds of movies are there? If you go on Netflix and you look at all the different kinds of movies, there's animation, there's romantic movies, there's scary movies, there's comedies, there's action movies, there's documentary. There's just tons of movies. So, asking only about 2 different kinds of movies is very biased. So, we're going to say yes, it's biased, and then explain. So, we're going to say because there are many different types of movies. And this question only accounts for 2. Okay, so how could we reword it so it's not biased? So, how about just asking the question, what kind of movies do you like?
Well, come on. You gonna meet me at the house?
Or, what's your favorite kind of movie? Okay, so question 5, you want to determine what percent of teens ages 14 to 18 watch wrestling on TV. At a high school wrestling match, you ask every third teenager whether he or she watches wrestling on TV. How might this cause bias in your survey? So you also don't have to look at the question you're asking. You also have to look at where you're asking it. So if you're talking about, you want to know how many teenagers watch wrestling on TV, and you go to a wrestling match to ask them, I'm pretty sure that's probably biased. Because if they're going to pay money to go to buy a ticket to the wrestling match, they're probably going to sit there in their living room and watch wrestling on TV. So we don't want to ask these people this question. How might this cause bias in your results? We have to answer our question. How might this cause bias in your results? So I would say, if they are actually at a wrestling match, they are more likely than others that we didn't survey, which is going to skew our survey results, to watch it on TV. Okay? And then you want to know how many of your classmates have cell phones. To determine this, you send every classmate an email asking, do you own a cell phone? How might this method of gathering data affect the results of your survey? Well, and I'm not going to write the answer to this down, but don't you think if they have an email account and they check it often, that they are pretty good with technology and will probably have a cell phone? So you probably don't want to gather your data that way because that's going to skew your data. All right, these are your guided questions. One, two, three, four. pause it, answer them on a separate sheet of paper, bring them to me tomorrow. If you need me, contact me. If not, I will see you tomorrow.